Come on. There we go. Now it's recording. I might have been staring at the camera for a little bit too long. What's going on, guys? Welcome to another Eastern Current Fishing Podcast. Eastern Current Saltwater Inshore Fishing Podcast. It's me and Mike. We're going to talk today to y'all. We're going to talk today to y'all about striper fishing. I'm struggling with my words. It's been a long day. Had a duck hunt this morning and been up, since very early this morning. But we're going to get after it. So we're going to talk about striper fishing with our relation being, the Cape Fear River. But a lot of these coastal rivers from North Florida all the way up to, Virginia are going to see these same patterns and same deals going on this time of year. So we're excited to talk about that, and we're gonna get after it. The one other thing I wanted to bring up was we've got a sponsor for the podcast right now. His name is Eric Williams. He's a realtor here in town. I'll link his stuff below, but he's a good friend of mine. Great fisherman. He's got a YouTube channel. I'll link that below as well as his website. So y'all should definitely go check him out. If you're thinking about buying a house here in Wilmington, you like fishing, hit him up. He's just a great resource for both. And he's got his YouTube channel. He does a lot of fishing stuff on there as well. Just a really good, down-to-earth, nice guy that I think y'all will really like and would love to sell you a house or help you sell a house. Right? Those are the two things you can do as a realtor.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, yeah, check him out, guys. We're going to get after it. Mike, how you doing?
Good.
Doing good? You talk for a second.
Another day, guys. We want to talk to y'all about striper, some of their transition period that we're kind of going through right now, kind of where we're coming from and what we're looking forward to and where those fish should be starting to head. Especially like right now in kind of the Cape Fear River, which is what we're most familiar with, I would say.
Yeah.
We're coming out of a time of year where the water's been, I won't say warm, but the fall time is very hit or miss. The water temperature is kind of up, down. So now we're transitioning into that kind of consistently cool to cold water temperatures.
Yeah.
And that's going to pattern, especially our striper here in the Cape Fear, to kind of do the same thing day after day after day. Versus in the fall time, they might be out in open water chasing bait as it's coming out of these creeks and it's starting to flow out to the ocean. And, the next day they might be down in deep water looking for something down at the bottom.
Yeah.
So they're kind of hit or miss. They're all over the place, especially like in the fall time. You get a warm day, that's going to push those fish back down. Once we start getting a little cooler days, they'll come back up, they'll feed. They like that cooler water, I feel like.
Yeah, they definitely do.
Go ahead.
No, I think I agree with you there. It seems like, for me, it's like that fall. It's not the cold water, but it's the cooling water that like upper 60s that gets them super jazzed. Maybe like low 70s, upper 60s. Or maybe a little, I don't even know, a little cooler than that. But where you've got like a real suspended fish bite where you're catching them on like X-Wraps and jerk baits and mirror lures and top waters. And then it goes into that like, I don't know, when it gets colder, the bite still, when it gets cold, it's like you're not getting that suspended bite as much. It's more suspended just above the structure or in the structure. To then like dead of winter, the bite can still be. It's funny because it's like a normal fish. Like it puts the fish down deeper as it gets really cold, but like it doesn't change the way the stripers bite. Like the trout, it's like, and the redfish, it can like put them down really deep, and they don't want to eat anything. But the stripers like, no, I'm still gonna eat everything that comes through here, but I'm gonna be sitting down here a little deeper.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's one fish that, for me, it's like once I feel like, especially when you know where they are, they're just a frustrating fish because it's like they a lot of times too they show up so well on your graph and you can see them and you can know they're there and just not figure out. You're like, okay, I thought I had this pattern down and now I can't get these fish to eat. Like that topwater bite we tried to get on the other day, like was perfect. Everything was right and it was like okay topwater bite. It wasn't insane, but what was that, about a month ago maybe?
Yeah, about a month ago.
What do you think the water temp was then?
Probably mid-60s.
Mid-60s, okay. Yeah. So mid-60s is that. I guess it's all relative of like if it's is it cooling off or warming up, like that. That's kind of what triggers them. So,
and these fish are especially in our area, which focusing if you go up to Virginia to the Chesapeake Bay, totally different kind of scenario there, fishing them in big open water out in the bay. But like here, our fish are very tidal dependent.
For sure.
And that's just because of the way our river system is set up. You know, during the day, high tide, daytime, you know, the time of day, I don't feel like makes as big of a difference as when that tide cycle's in the right spot. You know, these fish, they're gonna push up, especially in that shallower 5 to 6 foot ledge, that area close to the bank when the tide's high, the current's moving good, and there's some structure there to where they can sit just behind it, you know, and walk out and grab a bait or grab a bait fish, whatever's coming by, and swim right back to the structure. That's my favorite time to be able to fish them, is that high falling or the top, you know, like last 2 hours of that incoming tide. Those fish will push up either right off the grass line or right on the structure, really close to the grass. That's when you can target them with twitch baits, mirror lures, and that suspended bite that you're talking about in that 5 to 6 foot of water. And then as that tide starts to drop out and those fish don't feel comfortable there, depending on where you're at and depending on what you're kind of like the section of the river that you're kind of fishing, you know, you're either going to be maybe dock fishing or fishing out deeper water. But those fish aren't moving completely out in the middle of the river in 50 to 60 feet of water or whatever, you know, you're close to deep water wise. So, you know, you may have to change tactics, go to swim baits, jig heads, and this is another fish that will eat shrimp off the bottom. You can bait fish them with the same techniques that you're catching redfish and black drum in the river. They will eat that. And I think that's what makes them so exciting to me to go fish for, because you can target so many other things and still be productive striper fishing.
For sure.
It may not be the best
It's such a good, like, filler fish, you know?
It may not be the best way to catch them at that particular time period, but if they're there, you have just as good a chance of catching them as you do a redfish or whatever.
Right. No, I love that.
So.
And I think it's kind of funny because me and Mike, like, I think we have, like, I don't know, different ways that we like to fish for them. Like, I love to catch stripers however I can catch them. Mike loves that shallow stuff. For some reason, to me, like, that deep, like, 15, 18 feet of water and, like, fishing a swim bait as light as I can and, like, feeling like, I'm like, this is not, there's no way. And then, boom, you just get thumped super hard and you're like, oh, my gosh. Something about that, to me, really gets me fired up. I mean, I like all the bites, but that really, same with trout in, like, really deep water on DOA. It's like, you just got to be so patient to where you feel like, there's no way this is working. And then you get the bite, and it's a rewarding bite to me.
I was going to say, the reward's huge in that scenario.
Yeah, where you're counting 15, 20, 30 seconds without doing anything, and then you give a little pop, and then let it fall, and wham! And just slam it. Oh, it's so fun. I'm thinking about one spot in particular right now that I want to go do that at right now. But
I think too, with the way that you fish, you target a bigger size class. You know,
you can, for sure.
You know, and this is a fish just like, you know, you hear us talk about redfish and trout. They all school kind of that similar size. Striper are definitely the same way.
Yeah.
They're not as dedicated size-wise, but I feel like 90% of the time, once you catch the first one, and if it's, you know, 15 inches, probably the rest of the fish that you're going to catch in that area minus 1 or 2 is probably going to be in that same, you know, 14 to 18 inch size class or whatever. They're just kind of set up that way. But yeah, I think for me, I love throwing hard baits and just getting that like giant reaction bite, because we don't have, I mean, we have some bass fishing here, but we don't have good like natural lake bass fishing
for sure
here. So for me, that's like the closest thing that we can get to growing up in the mountains and kind of being used to some of that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I love that. Twitch wraps, X wraps. And don't be afraid, like, you know, you see a lot of guys troll for stripers in lakes. You can do the same thing here. You're just having to figure out those areas where it's productive to do that. And it might take you some time to kind of sit down, break down the river. You're using your graph a lot this time of year if this is something that you really want to get into and not just catch the random ones here and there. But if you can take that time to go through, look at the bottom structure, see what's there, and troll and fish to those certain areas, those fish will definitely stack up.
For sure. Most definitely. It's trolling can be so productive. It's something that I often overlook, but it's a great way, like you said, to find those fish and then reset up and get after them. It's funny too. We see with trout where you'll fish an area, and then you troll through it. And I've done this very few times, but all of a sudden you start whacking them, and it's like just that bait stays down there a little bit longer in the bite zone, or I don't know what it is, but they definitely seem to key into the trolling sometimes. I mean, it can get. I've had a couple days striper fishing where it's pretty silly. It's like every pass is like boom, 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 you catch 3 fish, and then make another pass, boom, 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 3 fish. Yep. And it's not my favorite way to catch them, but on a day where you're not catching them other ways, it can be. Or on a day where they're biting the troll really good, it's fun. Sometimes it's just fun to sit there and reel them in. So,
go ahead.
You go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, I think for me, especially like looking in that shallower water areas, I'm looking for either not necessarily pinch points, but areas of converging seams of water. I'm looking for structure. This is a great time of year on these like new moon tides, big king tides. Go out at dead low, go through the areas, and you can visually see what these fish are sitting on, because it might be a 5 to 6 foot tide at that time. You can go out there and get an idea of exactly what's there. Take your time, look at what's around you, and picture the tide and how that current is going to flow past some of the structure in these different areas, and start putting together the puzzle pieces. It's a great way to locate at least some kind of structure to go back and target later. And once that tide's in the right phase, go back, target it. Not all structure is going to hold fish, but once you put that puzzle piece together of like, all right, this is a structure, they didn't hold on this, then once you find that school of fish, you can start putting that puzzle piece together of exactly what they're looking for.
For sure.
So it's a very I don't want to say like precision based, but it's a very common sense, logical based, put the puzzle pieces together type of fishery.
It is, yeah, and that's what can be so confusing to some people, but also so helpful once you start to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons I like fishing a swim bait so much for the stripers, is because it's a bait that I can fish both ways real quickly. Like I can throw it up on the bank and slow roll it off the bank in the shallow water, and then I can throw it up current and let it fall and fish deep. But stripers aren't picky on the bait. It's just got to be in their strike zone. That's the hardest part of the whole thing, and knowing where they are orienting at what tide and how to put that bait in the strike zone. So it's a lot of trial and error, but color. I'm fishing usually just white, almost always just white. I'll fish chartreuse or pink sometimes, but a white like dye dapper swim bait, or like that's a saltwater assassin. Or a big 5-inch diesel minnow or a 4-inch diesel minnow on what size jig head do I like to throw? I can never remember the sizes of the jig heads. That's my biggest, and I'm willing to admit that everybody now.
3/8 or a half.
3/8 or half ounce, yeah. I've got I'm sure I've said this 30 times on the podcast. I've got all my jig heads in the tackle box, and I look at them and know what size I need to throw, but I never know what that size is called. So don't make fun of me. But that beer run. The C.S. Lewis, that's a Christian author. The C.A. Richardson.
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis wrote Narnia. C.A. Richardson, he's got that beer run color that is bomb. It's like white with a little bit of clear with some gold flake in it, and those stripers really dig that. So if you haven't done the 4-inch beer run, is a really good. It looks like a little river herring or like a little shad or mullet, but the more so this time of year they're feeding on the shad and the river herring that are actually staying up in the river system, the smaller ones. So,
and this is also one of these one fish that I feel like when we're talking baits, most of the time trout, redfish, all that, as wintertime comes on, we start shrinking our bait size. When I go out and target a striper, even it doesn't matter if it's January, February, and it's freezing cold out, I'm not picking up a smaller bait to target them. There might be a day or two where they get a little picky, but for the most part,
I just wanted to see it.
Yeah, you're fishing deep, dark water, especially in our area. It can be chocolate milk almost. During the winter, if we get some big heavy rains or more snowfall in the middle of the state or something, and you're getting a lot of runoff, that water's dirty, and you want something big that they can see. And they're willing, like you said, they're eating shad and river herring and stuff like that. So those are bigger baits in general. So you can step up that size 5-6 inch. Don't be afraid to throw those big swim baits to get that bite.
For sure.
So, and I think that's one reason I like throwing, the big Rapala X wraps. You can work them slow, especially the floating ones. You can twitch, get it down in the strike zone, let it float up just above it, rip it back through them, but you can fish a big bait to these fish.
Definitely.
And
they're reactionary. Like that type of bait just works really well for them.
So.
Yeah, that's a good point. You want them to see it. I mean, they're sitting there in that current waiting for stuff to drift by. Mm-hmm. And if it's a small bait and it's too far away from them, it's less of a chance that they're going to see it and less of a chance that you're going to get bit. So the other fun part about fishing that deep water with like big swim baits and stuff like that, or not even big ones, but is how hard they thump it when they decide they want to eat it. It's like, wham! Yeah. Like a big old trout or something. And sometimes you do catch trout, up in some of the rivers that we'll fish. It's always a surprise, mid-December on to see them in that real deep, fast water, but you will see it sometimes. So don't be surprised if you bring up a big old gator next to the boat.
Yeah.
What else is there to discuss here? So let's talk about kind of what these fish orient to. Like what is a go-to spot, December through January? What do these fish like?
We've talked about structure. Structure is obviously a big thing. They're like any other bass. They want to orient to something. But when it comes to breaking down the type of structure, it can really be anything. I've seen them hold on everything from small dock pilings or like broken up wood pilings that are just kind of scattered around where they only have 1 to 2 foot of relief, to something, as big as some of the port docks and stuff that stick way up, big concrete, piers. And the way that you're going to fish those might change a little bit because of the way the seams and, the current eddies and stuff work off of them. But we'll leave that up to y'all to figure out. That's kind of that puzzle piece that you're going to have to put together.
Yeah.
But, those areas are where those fish are going to kind of locate to. But at the same time, they're also looking for natural things, like creek mouth entrance that's coming in with a ledge, and that's the thing that I think I like about them the most is it doesn't necessarily just have to be structure. It can be something as simple as, a cutout mud bank or a ledge drop off, something, it's out off the bank that's not as obvious to
a difference, just something different. Yeah. They'll orient to. I think that's what I like about them too, man, is there's so many places to catch them, so many ways to catch them.
Yeah.
It becomes like a largemouth bass to where there's just a lot of different. You've got a lot of fish out in the same fish, if that makes sense. But yeah, and Michael was such a good resource for where these fish live because Michael used to work for marine fisheries and shock them. So he would shock them and tag them, and so he has a lot of striper spots in his pocket. So. But Mike said you'd go back and fish a lot of times. Like they'll re-stack in those spots, but a lot of times after you shocked, they wouldn't be there for a few days.
Yeah, and it just depends. A lot of times those fish will come back to the same exact spots and they're gonna sit there. But as far as feeding, it messes them up for the first day or two. But once they get past that, they're gonna go back to feeding and being normal. But I think the coolest thing for me is we used our graph a lot in that boat. We're targeting. We don't get to target those suspended fish like you're talking about fishing in 15, 20 feet of water because the shock range just isn't there.
Yeah.
Your deepest, you might get lucky to hit a fish in 15, but most of the time it's 10 to 12 feet of water. I think that's one of the reasons I enjoy such that shallow water kind of mentality. Yeah. It's because seeing how they relate and how they get into that structure and
what they were on.
Yeah.
You have your head in that zone. You kind of know what's going on there.
So, and these fish, they'll move. That's the thing. Even during the winter, coldest times in January, if the tide's right and it's kind of a warmer day compared to what the days before are trending, those fish do not mind this cold weather. They're going to push up shallow. They're going to get on those grass banks. They're going to get on that little bit of structure right where those creek points or creek mouths dump out, whatever it is, and they're going to stage up there because that's just what they're trained to do. That's what, they naturally would do in that scenario. And I think that's, It may take you finding that right spot or whatever, but they're going to make that transition daily sometimes during that little period. And then they'll drop back off once they get super cold, and they might go sit in 15, 20 feet of water.
For sure.
But they're very patternable, but they're also very transitional fish.
Yeah.
Just because of where they live at. One day they could be here, and then next day, they're 20 foot deeper, but they're still going to be feeding every single day.
For sure.
So.
For sure. Here's a question I want to ask you, and I want to say something to the listeners first, but the question is going to be, based off of all your shocking and all your knowledge through what you did with marine fisheries, what is the perfect storm of a striper spot? I want to know that. But before, I forgot to mention this at the beginning. If y'all love our podcast and want to help support us, go check out our Patreon page. We do extra podcasts there every week. So you're going to have a whole nother episode on Patreon to listen to every single week if you do like that. And even if you don't want to listen to more of us and you just want to support us, you can go on over to Patreon and support us over there. We thank you so much. It just inspires us and helps us keep going. We could not do this without our Patreon subscribers. So thank y'all for everyone who does that. Actually, I want to give an actual, because it happened today, new Patreon subscriber. If you're listening, it was, let's see here on my email. Colin Lewis. Thank you, man. Thank you so much for supporting us on Patreon. But yeah, me and Mike are putting out some really good content and sharing stuff that we wouldn't normally share to this large of a platform over on there. So definitely go check it out. But Mike, what is your perfect, as far as shocking go, like what kind of spot was like money? Was there a spot that you always shocked them pretty good if you waited a little while, and like what was that spot like? And what are the coordinates?
So putting together the perfect storm is the vertical transition that I'm looking for on the bank. I'm talking about the puzzle pieces of having structure up shallow along the grass banks. So whether that's a cutout bank, typically I love dock pilings. There's a couple old docks. If you live in this area and you ride around the river at low tide, or you have ran into them, you know where they're at.
Yeah.
But there's dock pilings that stick up. They're covered completely at high tide, but once that mid to low tide, they're exposed. So perfect, like 6 to 8 feet of water, some kind of structure that stands out vertically to give those fish something to suspend on.
Yeah.
And then from there, within, a small distance, less than 100 yards from there, I'm looking for a ledge, I'm looking for a drop off, something that gives those fish somewhere to transition to.
Okay.
As soon as that tide drops down below 4 feet, especially when it starts getting colder, that water drops off, it's less than 4 feet, they're going to pull off and they're going to start sitting on that transition spot. And if you can find that with structure, you have the money spot.
Yeah.
Because those fish can go from feeding here to feeding here, back to feeding here. I mean, it's just back and forth,
yeah.
And they're not always going to hold exactly there, but if I had to go put my money on it and go fish one spot, if I can put those two puzzle pieces together, that's going to be where I'm going to put my money on.
Yeah.
I have a couple places here that I know are like that, and it doesn't really even matter the time of year. Even when it's warm during the summer, instead of them coming up and feeding shallow, even at high tide, if it's the peak of the day, they might still be hanging out in that deeper water on that structure because of how warm it is. But, at nighttime, they will definitely push up there and feed in those shallows.
Heck yeah.
But most of the time they're gonna be oriented in that deeper water during during the warmer part of the year. But if you can put structure that meets that range to where they can transition back and forth without expending a lot of energy, that's gonna be your best bet.
Definitely.
So
definitely, I think that sums it up as far as a money spot. I think a big confluence is too another great area, like where the Brunswick and the Cape Fear meet, or where Peters Point, where you've got these two big currents coming together. Those areas can be productive too. They can sometimes be very confusing on how to fish them, though. That's the tough part. Is it's like, all right, where do I need to sit? Where do I need to throw? There could be 100 fish sitting on that spot, and then if you don't set up right and fish it just right, they're all sitting in that one little current seam or that one underwater break, and if you don't know how to get to it, it can be tough. Or it can just take a couple hours to sit there and figure out where they're sitting.
Yeah. And those fish will stay in those spots, whether high tide or low tide, depending on the time of year. But those are spots that give them areas to move to. For sure. And transition throughout those tide cycles. For sure. So, a little giveaway there, but.
Yeah, I think those spots still are so hard to go catch fish at sometimes. If you go there in the right times, it's not. But there's spots that always are going to have fish. There is always going to be fish on them. So, so we've talked about we talked about baits. We talked about places. We've talked about different techniques. What kind of rod do you like to use when fishing for striper? I guess it really depends on the technique.
Yeah, I was gonna say I like something stiffer if I'm doing swim baits, especially in like structure. Like stuff that comes up above the water to where I gotta weave them around. But when it comes to throwing twitch baits and stuff, I don't like as soft of a rod as a trout fish with, but I want something with that lighter tip because I am fishing a lot of trebles and it is a reaction bite. So, longer rod and a light tip, I feel like is key because the biggest thing with these fish, I feel like is the longest cast that you can get, the better off you are. Yeah. Because
just cover water. Cover
water in the strike zone or where these fish are sitting. I think this is like the biggest thing, or that this is what I learned the most when I was shocking is the areas that they live in. Even though there's a school of fish per se there, they're not necessarily always wadded on top of one another. You might go, 100 yards, and that whole 100-yard stretch has got fish just scattered everywhere at a certain tide cycle. And then once the tide switches or it's low tide and all those fish have to go somewhere, then they might go ball up deep. Yeah. But as soon as they get that option to push back up and get in that shallow water, 6-8 feet of water, they spread out so much. So being able to make a long cast and cover and keep your bait in that strike zone the longest is the key to being effective with them.
For sure. So I'm just going to go the opposite of you just because you talked about like a jerkbait rod. I like kind of a broomstick when I'm fishing those swim baits. I'm fishing a single hook. I really want to have that driving power in that deep water. You don't know what kind of slack you got. So I've got a 7.2 medium heavy swim bait rod that not like a swim bait rod like for big bass swim baits, but it's just a bigger, beefier rod. Mm-hmm. It's not even bigger. It's got some serious backbone to it. Yeah. Those soft tips. If your bait's 18 feet away from you in current and you swing real hard with a soft tip, you're gonna miss hook sets. I mean, you want to really be able to drive that hook in. Mm-hmm. So fishing something stiffer when I'm doing that is important. And a lot of times I'll throw it. I might only twitch the bait twice the whole time it's in a swing. Like I'll throw it up there and I just keep that rod tip up and halfway through I'll pop it once, just a little pop, and then maybe 3/4 of the way through I'll pop. I'm just trying to dredge the bottom with that bait. Mm-hmm. Not on the bottom, but just knowing that it's somewhere in that 5 foot to the bottom range where those fish can see it, have time to react to it, eat it, and I can rip their lips right off their face with that 7.2 medium heavy. So that's how I like to fish for, man. It's fun. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love a jerkbait bite too. Yeah. But and my biggest striper of the year this year came on a jerkbait up on Lake Gaston, but catch them in that current. It's just like trout fish. I feel like it's like trout fishing. So in current at least. Mm-hmm. So it's funny how we can say that, and then like someone might be listening from Texas. It's like that's not like trout fishing at all. Yeah. Or somebody might be listening from the Pamlico Sound. It's like I've caught a million trout in my life, but I've never trout fished like that. Yeah. So it's like trout fishing in some of our areas that we have here where these trout orient in the warmer times to heavy current. So, and I know they do that in other places too, but still. So, well, guys, thank y'all so much for checking out this podcast. We're also going to start doing, hopefully, on a weekly basis, if not, a bi-weekly basis. Bi-weekly, that means every other week. I'm a fishing guide, not a school teacher. So, but on every other week basis, try to do a bonus podcast episode for the public. It's going to be a short. We're going to pick a little short topic and talk about it for a few minutes, and that'll be just an extra little tidbit to get you through the week through this winter. We're going to try to get that going before duck season goes out, but we're definitely going to, and that might just be some weeks just me talking or just Mike talking, but just 10-15 minutes of just sharing a couple little things, like a very small, very highly focused subject. But just to give y'all some extra content to chew on throughout the week. But as always, thanks for checking us out. Like we said earlier, go check out our Patreon if you want more full-length episodes, and we will see y'all soon. Later.